Hello, I'm Rod Taylor, National Leader of the Christian Heritage Party of Canada. Last week, the Liberal government introduced Bill C-14, which we believe is something like a national suicide pact. They're asking the rest of us Canadians to buy into the idea that it's okay to kill old people. Also last week, the Liberal governments, both federal and the Ontario government, committed to sending emergency teams and yet more money to Attawapiskat to try to derail the plague of suicides among First Nations youth there and in other Indigenous communities. On Thursday, the other shoe dropped when the federal government tabled its long-anticipated Bill C-14, designed to free up hospital beds by killing old people. Ironically, and almost simultaneously, people trying to escape the pain of existence by ending it all were competing for tax dollars with those who want someone to help them escape the pain of existence by ending it all. Of course, that's not the narrative they want you to believe. They want you to think C-14 is all about choice and death with dignity. But underneath all the hubris and heart-wrenching tales of tragedy, intolerable suffering, the phrase may be more about the frantic antics of federal and provincial budget teams trying to deal with the demographic imbalance of payers and users of health care than it is about patient comfort. Statistically, there simply aren't enough hospital facilities for our aging population, nor enough working young people, thanks in part to abortion, to pay for the extended care of the elderly, the infirm, and the disabled. Of course, we in the CHP believe that doing the right thing is way more important than budgets and statistics. God, after all, directs us to care for those in need, and He will provide everything we need to do so. However, in the pragmatic world of Canadian politics, some lives are just seen as expendable, and others are useful for their emotional value. Why have Canadians become so complacent about inflicting death on the elderly, and yet so justly concerned about preventing death among troubled youth, who also apparently have swallowed the line that their lives are not worth living, and that they are experiencing what they call intolerable suffering? Well, we've been lied to. We've been fed a story that ailing Canadians are just being hooked up to machines against their wills to keep their hearts beating and their lungs expanding while they endure excruciating pain. That is the oft-repeated public narrative. We've also been told that the Supreme Court, composed of 9 mortal human beings, each with his or her own moral flaws, is capable of making just decisions for 35 million Canadians. We've been told that court decisions are final, irrevocable, and infinitely wise. History declares otherwise. As a nation, we've conveniently forgotten that the Supreme Courts have been wrong before, like in 1929 when they decreed that women were not persons. We've carelessly forgotten the constitutional provision of the notwithstanding clause that would allow Parliament to set aside Supreme Court decisions for up to 5 years. But instead, we've allowed these 9 individuals to throw out our laws, throw out babies, and keep the bathwater, as in the 1988 decision that denied personhood to preborn babies, and to throw out the moral values upon which our nation's laws and civilization depend. When it comes to the tragedy of suicide among young people, both on and off reserve, we also need to look below the surface, and we need to do it quickly. In Attawapiskat and other reserves, suicide is not an isolated event, although those who join themselves in suicide pacts are arguably isolated and lonely individuals. Pulling young people back from the brink is about more than providing education, jobs, and clean drinking water, as important as those are for healthy emotional existence. As we speak, armies of well-meaning psychologists and grief counselors are preparing to descend on the troubled communities. What new hope will they offer to these precious young people whose hope for meaning and purpose has been replaced by false hopes and distorted dreams? It seems so obvious to me that people who are contemplating ending their lives need real hope so they can summon courage to go on, to face the challenges of life, whatever these are. Now, even Bob Ray, a person whose views are often very different from ours, had this to say in the Globe and Mail last week on April 15th in his article, Suicide is a National Problem. He said, "It is a time for all of us to take a good hard look in the mirror. People who have given up hope, young and old, are choosing to die rather than to live." End quote. Young people living in a democratic country with their lives ahead of them and opportunities for employment, marriage, and personal achievement should not be gasping away their youthful energy in dark and shrinking nightmares of despair. Mental health, the rallying cry of sincerely concerned politicians and bureaucrats, should itself be analyzed. In a healthy society, healthy emotion should be the norm. Troubled and despondent young people should be the exception. Across the country, however, and especially on reserves, we, Canadians, have robbed our youth of their natural hope. We've blinded them with a postmodern cultural bias and condemned them to a worldview devoid of eternal perspective. In our public schools, we've taught children, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, that the God who created them in His image and for His purpose no longer exists and cannot meet their needs or answer their questions or their prayers. We've taught them that life has no particular value. In fact, we demonstrate that by using tax dollars to kill over 100,000 preborn babies every year. And those who miraculously survive the abortionist knife are now supposed to nurture self-esteem and find personal purpose in a meaningless cultural existence. We expose them to night after dreary night of brutal TV wrestling matches between hot-headed and arrogant fighters. We expose them to endless variations of police shootouts and violent and gruesome killings, prurient and selfish sex acts, displays of homosexual comedy, and a pathetic array of accusations and denials of assaults, drug use, and fraud. And then we wonder why they find life depressing. We want students, of course, to make responsible decisions for themselves about all manner of things, from sexual activity to career choices to not inflicting self-harm. At the same time, we tell them in the schools that they're only advanced animals with no eternal purpose. On the reserves especially, we talk about respect for the elders, and then, as a broader society, we discuss how we can help our elders kill themselves. We encourage youth to stay away from drugs and excessive alcohol consumption. Then in Parliament, we discuss how to legalize marijuana. Our society, both native and non-native, is in a serious identity crisis. We find ourselves lost. We want autonomy, self-government, and freedom from rules and restrictions. We want the freedom to do whatever we want, but we don't want consequences for our poor choices. We want to spend, but never pay. We want all the joys of life without the pain of childbirth, the challenges of growing up, the discipline of work, the sacrifices and commitments required in marriage and family life, and the diminishing of strength and ability that sometimes comes with old age. Reality TV has created a fantasy world where only the strong, the beautiful, and the wealthy can achieve purpose and happiness. And now our government has allowed the Supreme Court to thrust us down the rabbit hole of diminishing returns in regard to the value and sanctity of human life. There will be debate in Parliament on this Bill C-14, but it will be with an urgency and a haste born out of an undeserved awe of the Supreme Court. Some so-called progressives say the proposed law does not go far enough. They want minors included and those suffering from poor mental health. Yes, just like the troubled youths in Attamapiskat. Others worry that failure to pass a law, any law, by June 6th will plunge Canada into an unregulated Wild West show of doctors killing patients, as if that weren't already happening in secret. Now, being pushed into a bad decision by 9 Supreme Court bullies would be a tragedy. We expect courage of our politicians. Now is the time for politicians and all Canadians to stand up for human life with its purpose and meaning. Not only the young people of Attawapiskat, but all of Canada's aging seniors need to know that their lives have. It's time to return to the principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law, as it says in the Charter preamble. As a nation, we sing, "God keep our land glorious and free." If we truly mean that, if we want to experience that freedom, we'll have to find the courage to explain that to the young people in Attawapiskat and across this country. Our aging seniors also need to be reminded that our God has a plan and a purpose for their lives, even when their strength is failing. We Canadians do need to make a pact, but not a suicide pact like C-14, but a solemn covenant to restore to our nation an awareness that all our freedoms, our children, our mental health, our clean water, and our democracy itself are gifts from the hand of our loving Creator. If we will renew our covenant as a nation, established on His principles, and acknowledge again that He shall have dominion from sea to sea, we can begin to see hope spring up anew in places like Attawapiskat, maybe even in places like Toronto and Ottawa. To learn how you can do more to help the CHP restore real hope for young people and for all Canadians, visit our website, chp.ca. Thank you for listening. I'm Rod Taylor.